Hi, I am Bill Hodges, and this is Spotlight on Government. And we have one of our old friends with us today who's been with us before and has been a great hit. Kevin Jackson, Chief Investigator for the Consumer Protection Department here in Hillsborough County. It's great to have you with us.
Thank you, Bill, for having me.
You know, that's a really big title, Consumer Protection Agency. I suppose you don't send people out with guns when I want to buy a car to help me and protect me. What is it that you do?
Well, part of it is that we educate, just like we're doing today, but we intake consumer complaints from Hillsborough County citizens and others if the consumer transaction took place in Hillsborough County, and that gives us jurisdiction to investigate, mediate, prosecute if need be, any type of consumer complaint.
So you have a law enforcement edge to what you do also.
Yes, many of us are ex-law enforcement. I worked with the Attorney General and Tampa Police Department. Some of my investigators work for FDLE. So a lot of us do have investigator backgrounds from law enforcement and other government agencies, so that gives us, kind of that ground floor work that we can, apply to this topic.
Those of you that look at this desk here, if you can see it in front of me, my wife said, looks like your desk at home, and that's probably very true. But these are the pamphlets that are available, or at least some of the pamphlets. I don't imagine you brought them all.
No, I did not.
These are some of the pamphlets that are available. And let's just start over on this side. Telemarketing fraud. What are some of the tips you might give on telemarketing frauds?
That's a really big one. Well, one of the main things that consumers can do is get on those do not call lists, both with the Federal Trade Commission as well as the state's Department of Division of Consumer Services. They both run do not call lists, so consumers can get on those lists, which will prevent a lot of the unsolicited telemarketing calls that may come in your home that may be fraudulent in some way. So to eliminate the calls, obviously your best way to go.
Interestingly enough, we had a friend, or have a friend I should say, who woke up in the middle of the night, and there was a voice on there that was quavering that their grandson was calling, and he was in jail in so-and-so Canada, and he needed $1,500 or $3,000 or whatever it was, or they were going to keep him in jail forever, and he needed it wired to him right away. Are there a lot of these kind of scams?
That's a fairly common one. I've heard that one before, and those and injuries, they'll call saying he's in a hospital rather than be in jail or something, and the bottom line is with that, you've got to recognize that as a very highly unlikely situation. Don't part with any personal information, don't part with any money until you do some follow-up. Some of those things that they're telling you over the phone are easily verifiable, and do your homework. That's generally a scam.
Well, these people are such wonderful people. They really are. And of course, waking up in the middle of the night and having that happen, their adrenaline kicked in, and it cost them. They sent a lot of money, wired it to a Canadian city, and of course, by the time they figured it all out, the money was gone.
Absolutely, and there's so many variations of that scam as well. And again, you just got to be on your guard. Don't be so trusting, and try to take a few minutes, take a step back, think about what you're doing, and try to verify the information they're giving you.
Well, if somebody calls you like that in the middle of the night, what would be the first way you'd want to do that? How would you verify it? What could you do?
Well, depending on what the story is, if they're in a hospital, normally a hospital is going to be calling you, not somebody else. And if they do that, then of course you have that identifying information. You can call back and verify that he's actually a patient there.
But you don't want to call the number they give you, right? You
Correct.
should go to the
no,
book
absolutely.
and look up a number,
exactly.
or call for a number in that city.
Absolutely. It's just so unusual, so highly unlikely that for them to score on something like that. But it does happen, and it's a sad situation.
There's a lot of animals out there. Speaking of animals, moving is another area where a lot of people have a problem.
Yeah, it used to be a real huge problem all across the country. Luckily in Florida, just a few years ago, Florida passed a intrastate household moving law. But you remember the old scams used to be that you get an estimate over the phone, or some other kind of estimate, you pick up all your goods and move across the state, and when you got there, instead of 1,000, it's 3,000.
Oh, it's heavier than we thought.
Cash only, exactly. Whatever kind of, bait and switch tactic they wanted to use. But the bottom line is, you're there at your house, they have all your stuff, and they're not going to unload it until you part with your money. And oh, by the way, it's cash only. That was a real problem. Now in Florida, they can't do that lawfully. It doesn't mean it still doesn't happen, but if they do it now and it's reported, they could get in a lot of trouble. They can in fact go to jail for holding your goods hostage. So that was a real problem.
So immediately you should report it if you get in a dispute with a mover and they won't offload your things without asking for cash, you really ought to go to somebody quickly.
Well, actually before that, now they have to give you a written estimate. That's the law now, and it has to be signed. So when you have that estimate, that's the Bible. When you get there, all they can charge is what's on that estimate, unless you go and agree to some other services. Provided the consumer is not scamming them, because that happens too when they say, well, I'm going to move on to the first floor, and you get there and it's the fourth floor, things like that. The movers estimate their bids by that. But no, absolutely, if you've got a written agreement and you get there, they've got to take more than one form of payment, meaning you can do credit cards or checks, and it's whatever the written estimate was, and they cannot hold your goods hostage. If they do and you call the police, in fact, the police can arrest them on the spot.
Really?
Yes. And movers in Florida now need to be registered, licensed with the state, so now that we all know who they are. Before that wasn't the case as well. Keep in mind, though, if you're moving from Tampa to Atlanta, this law doesn't apply.
Oh, just in-state?
Just in-state. Florida doesn't have the jurisdiction to enforce their laws on other states. So the interstate moves, you still got to be careful. There's other information out there to help you with that, but this law only applies to in-state moves.
All right, another area, identity theft.
That's a big one.
This is one that's just ballooned, and I don't know whether it amazes me or what, because so many people are saying somebody did this and they've got me. How do I protect? I go to a restaurant and I give my server my credit card, and they walk off with it to run it through their register or whatever, and I don't know what's back there, what they're doing with it. Should I not do that?
No, that's perfectly okay, but if you have a criminal that has the proper devices, a skimming device that's going to intercept that magnetic information, if that's the case, there isn't anything you can do about that other than report it as soon as you discover it. So in that case, if you can go online, maybe instead of waiting for your statement to come and just to verify, because online banking and credit card is very popular now, you can instantaneously see what has occurred with your card each time you click and check it out. But if you can discover it, report it as quickly as possible, the liability, financial liability for the consumer is much less, if at all. Once you report it, there's laws to protect the liability there. So that's one of the new scams with the identity theft, is that type of thing, that capturing, the skimming of it. ATM machines as well.
I've had any number of people tell me, well, I don't do business online because I want to use my credit card there. But they give a credit card to a minimum wage employee to walk off with. Somehow it.
Well, let's keep in mind, consumers, it's most important. You get your best protection if you use your credit card. That's the bottom line. Now, do you want to have 15 of them in your wallet? No, probably not. You want to have one or two. I try to get people to do that. I try to get my wife to do that. One or two is good enough. The more you have, the more likelihood there's something that can happen with them and get stolen. But credit cards is the safer way to go.
I found out, interestingly enough, and maybe I misunderstood it, but that having too many credit cards, even if you don't have anything on them, affects your credit rating.
It does. They
because it's available credit.
Absolutely, that's true.
I always thought if I had all these people willing to give me money, that I must have been a good credit risk.
Yeah.
But then I found out that the more I had, even if I didn't use them, it counted against me.
Yeah, it's a little happy balance you got to find there with your credit score.
We're talking about online, which leads me to, you just said you can get on the telephone don't call list. Leave me alone. That's one of the brochures that you have here. But it also says online and offline. How can I get these scammers and spammers to quit sending me stuff?
Delete. That's the easiest way. Don't even open them, because they can usually, from what I understand, they can tell when you've opened them, so that maybe they've got someone that's interested in. Never reply. Try not to open them and just delete them. Spyware, spamware, all that kind of protection on your computer, load it up, make sure it's up to date. That will prevent some of these things from coming in. But to the extent that they know that you're not going to respond or read or entertain any of these offers, they'll go away. The other more dangerous one is those, the phishing ones, or where they counterfeit a legitimate looking website.
Even IRS.
Potentially,
I got
yeah.
one that counterfeited IRS's website telling
Right.
me I had a refund coming.
Right, and asking for some personal
Right.
data, sure.
But
Banks,
legitimate agencies will not do that, correct?
They're not going to ask for personal information unsolicited over the internet. They'll tell you that. That's what they keep preaching. So if you just remember that, even if you're not sure, just don't do it. Make a phone call so you know who you're talking to, or you send the email, meaning you
Go to the
go to the
company's
company's website and try to verify it that way.
But if I click on their link, on their email, this Bank of America, blah, 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 that's not necessarily going to Bank of America. It's more likely going to some site they've set up somewhere else to look like Bank of America's site. Now, how long they leave them up, they must take them up and down like mushrooms because they'd be getting caught.
Right, that's
So
exactly
it's
right.
better to go back to your records, go to Bank of America and say, did you send me an email like this?
That's correct. That's
Correct?
correct. Absolutely, absolutely. You got to be very careful online when doing transactions online. Look for that security lock at the bottom. Make sure you're visiting the website that you want to, as opposed to, again, these counterfeit ones. And it's not always good enough just to use the internet search sites. Try to locate the address and type it in directly as well, because I think there's sometimes one letter off, or instead of .com it's .net. You might go somewhere where you didn't mean to be.
And of course, the old Nigerian scam that's out there all the time. I am the banker in Babylonia, and I have money that I need to transfer. If you'll send me this much, I'll give it to you.
Right. That's a long, God, it's been around for 20 years. Used to be just come in the envelope. Now it comes on the internet and by the thousands. So
90% of the email coming out of Nigeria
yeah, or
is those scams.
Yeah.
They figured it out. 90% coming out of Nigeria.
but they'll filter through United Kingdom
Oh,
and through
yeah.
Canada too, so it doesn't look like it's coming from
That's
there.
right.
So you got to be
Using aliases.
Yeah, consumers got to be real careful.
Investments. Everybody today is looking for somewhere to protect themselves. The market is down almost half of what it was. What little money people have left, they're looking for places to put it.
Right.
And I get emails constantly saying, come to our brokerage house, or do this or do that online. You can save money. What about investments?
Yeah, that's a complicated situation. There's the state's Department of Financial Services is the state agency that really regulates sales of securities. So they have a lot more of the outreach information regarding that. But you can always go back to the tried and true. If it sounds too good to be true, then it probably is.
Somebody
Be
once
careful.
said you can't cheat an honest man.
That's right. Be careful of the private placement stuff, the private sounding investments. It's just not a good idea, especially
look at
now.
Madoff.
Yeah,
I mean,
absolutely.
Madoff there, you're sitting there with a man who had a $50 billion fund. And I saw on television the other day, there was a guy that went to the SEC and said, this is crooked. Here's all the data on it. And the SEC said, I'm just too busy. We can't do that now.
Yeah, for years he went to them.
Yeah.
He discovered it years ago. So, yeah, you got to be careful with those Ponzi schemes, things like that. Does it sound too good to be true?
Which brings me to another thing, mentioning that fellow going in and saying, look, there's a problem. Do I have to be personally affected by a problem before I come to you and say, I believe this is crooked, or there may be a problem here. I think you need to look at this, because there's a lot of people. Somebody comes and knocks on my door and they want to resurface my driveway with tar. I know that that's not an appropriate way to resurface my driveway.
Right.
All it's going to do is wash off at the next rain.
Right.
Should I call your office and say, these people are in my neighborhood doing this?
Absolutely, or law enforcement, because those types of folks I guarantee you, are going to commit some crimes in your neighborhood, because someone's going to fall for it. Those are the gypsies and travelers that come down from the north sometimes during the wintertime. And I know last year we had a few of those driveway paving complaints, and they in fact were documented travelers. We identified them. The guy was smart enough to get some tags and things like that. So, Yes, consumers, watching out in their neighborhood, report to local law enforcement, whatever intelligence that you can gain from that, and or our office as well. We can at least put you in touch with them or take the information and put it in our database as well.
I would think the police department would be less willing to take that kind of information because they're on a response basis where you having a heads up that these people are in the neighborhood might be a better place to call?
Well, if they're in your neighborhood right then the police could get there before we'll ever
okay.
chance, because we're not necessarily out on the streets where they are. So what they could do quickly, if it's a blue truck with a white camper they're pulling, if they spot it, they can pull it over and do a field interrogation and get all the information they need in case down the road there were some crimes committed. Now they know the identity of that suspect and go and prosecute them.
Well, speaking of people doing things at your house, what about home repairs and things? I saw something on television the other day where these people went ahead and had something done. It was done shoddily. The contractor kept putting more and more things on top of it, plus interest and so forth, and they ended up losing the house. How do we protect ourselves when we deal with these contractors coming out?
If the viewers are watching now, and if there's one thing you should do, is definitely contact our office before you hire a contractor. We can give you information that you have there on your desk that will give you a lot of tidbits about how to protect yourself. One of the things is you need to verify their license. Make sure they're licensed first of all, that they have the competency to do the work you're hiring them for. Friends, family, relatives, neighbors and coworkers, get the referrals from them. They've dealt with somebody, find somebody who's done that kind of work before. Get written estimates. Try to limit the amount of money you put up front, so you don't, if something goes wrong, you have less financial liability on the backside. Check complaint histories. Call us, call the building department, check the BBB online and find out there's a complaint history. All those things are very important with home improvement because that is probably the number one, that landlord-tenant is the number one complaint that comes in our office. Now it's a broad category, but quality workmanship, abandoned the job, high fees, all kinds of things like that. They come in our office all the time, and we end up having to try to solve those things. So a little prevention would help.
I think one of the things too is if they don't pull a building permit, and they're going to build something, or do rewiring or whatever, that's a pretty good indicator there, is it not?
Huge red flag, and keep in mind that if you're not a licensed contractor to do that work, you can't pull a permit. And beware of this, if they're trying to save you money and ask you to go pull the permit, because you as the homeowner can go pull your own permit.
That's right.
If they ask you to do that, that's a red flag. You should be asking, well, aren't you licensed? Can you pull it? Now, if you want to trust them as an unlicensed contractor and you pull the permit, then whatever work they do is now your responsibility if it doesn't meet building code. So
and
be
you
careful of that.
have to have it all ripped out and redone, correct?
And it will be on you because you've got the permit and now you're the contractor doing that work. Very difficult to resolve. So make sure you're not hiring an unlicensed guy unless you really, really know him. And even then, I don't recommend it.
We had a friend over in Apollo Beach that built a place for his air conditioning unit to sit on, and used an unlicensed contractor, and as it turned out, he was 8 inches over into where he couldn't build it.
Oh.
It was too close to the lot line. And when the building inspector just happened to come by and see it, they had another thing, and he said, that's got to go. Who did that?
Right.
And it cost them a fortune because they had to tear down this one and move it over 8 inches and rebuild. Couldn't get they wouldn't even give him a variance because he had avoided the building permit stage and had an unlicensed contractor do it. And they said, I'm sorry.
Now, in that case, if the consumer believes that he's licensed or he held himself out as licensed and he wasn't, then we would want that complaint to come to us because that's in fact a crime. We prosecute unlicensed contractors all the time. Yeah, we direct file with the state attorney, a warrant will be issued, and the guy will go to jail.
But you'd have to have something that showed, besides your word, that he said he was licensed, correct? Because it's a he said, she said thing.
Exactly. A written contract, business card, advertisement that somewhere indicates to
Says
a reasonable
licensed.
person that they're a licensed contractor. that's good enough.
And because they're licensed as a plumber doesn't make them licensed as an electrician.
That's correct, yeah, you got to
Isn't
be
that
licensed.
another area that you've
Yes.
got to work for?
Yeah, you can't work outside your competency, you know. General contractors, of course, can do everything because they can hire subs and such, but it's their responsibility.
All right, let's move on to rentals.
Okay.
I'm renting from someone. They're collecting the rent every month. My heat's not good. My plumbing's not good. I've got a problem. What can I do?
Yeah, with landlord tenants, two categories. You got the minimum housing code issues, the health and safety issues. Primarily, all that will fall on code enforcement, the county's code enforcement office. They got a number of code officers out there that will look at minimum housing codes. The other side of landlord tenant is the financial side. You know, I didn't get my security deposit back. They improperly withheld my security deposit, didn't give the proper claim, all those types of things. So the financial side, our office will get involved with. The minimum housing code, for the most part, if that's all that it is, then we'll get it over to code enforcement.
But you'll make that decision for them.
Absolutely, and we work together. I mean, they refer stuff to us and we refer stuff to them, and sometimes we work the same case because they were looking at fixing the upstairs chair rail and we're looking at trying to get the security deposit back because they moved out, you know. So we do a little bit of both, but most of the garden variety health and safety issues are going to be code enforcement.
With all of these, a written contract is your best bet, correct?
Correct. The more detail you can get in writing with your consumer transaction, no matter what it is, the better it is for you. And keep those records. You know, if there's warranties and guarantees involved, keep those, financial documents, all those. Because ultimately, when you call in our office and want to file a complaint, the first thing we ask you and the first thing we direct you in our pamphlet is provide us 2 copies of all supporting documents. Because that helps tell the story for us. Not only that, but it helps us prove if there is something wrongdoing to the business that something went wrong. So, yeah.
But it's a two-edged sword, isn't it? As a person dealing in any of these areas or for any of these services, I've got to read that contract and I've got to understand what's in it, correct?
Absolutely.
A lot of people just don't read the contract.
Absolutely. Sometimes we get consumer complaints that they don't have the necessary documents. Well, we ask the business to respond because we're in the middle. We're not taking sides.
Right.
Hey, here we got a complaint. We want to hear your side of the story. Here comes their side of the story with all the written documents. Then we go to the consumer and go, well, paragraph 6 covers that. Paragraph 7, you agreed to it. You signed it. This is the date. I'm sorry. There's nothing we can do. They did nothing wrong. You know.
They fulfilled their contract.
Absolutely. They may not be happy, but it doesn't mean the business did anything unfair or deceptive. You know, it's just that the consumer, for some reason, misunderstood or didn't read it carefully.
Yeah, I guess it gets down to sometime expectations for the amount of money. If I pay a very small amount and hire it could be a licensed painter even, and they do a substandard job, but it's not so bad that they've covered it all.
Right.
And they were left up to the attitude that they could choose the paint, that everything's in the base price.
Yeah.
Really, the consumer has no real standing there, do they?
The quality of workmanship issues like you're talking about, those are the most difficult to resolve because a lot of it's going to depend on the business's desire to satisfy the consumer. And if they've butted heads because some communication breakdown, then we can really help with that because we kind of take the emotion out of it and start looking at it carefully. We'll try to mediate those, but ultimately if the business is, you know, this is what I do, this is the type of work that I do, I'm sorry that I don't think it's perfect, but I'm not willing to spend more money to do it over. You're going to end up just having an unresolved complaint, and that's just the way that it's going to be. If the consumer feels strongly about it and they want to, you know, file a small claims court or have a judge intervene in some way, then they're welcome to do that. But
at least they'll know whether they have a case by the time you get done with them.
Yeah, I think if we go out there, because we'll go out there ourselves and look at it, well, let's get a third set of eyes on it. We'll go out there and see the work ourselves and see if it seems to be appropriate or reasonable. Normally the business will work with us, and if there's a few things that they can do to make it a little bit better, they generally do it. The businesses really respond, and they really enjoy us coming in sometimes. They don't want to have an unresolved complaint. They want to do what's right, but maybe the consumer's being unreasonable.
I think most companies do. I mean, there are the few that are the bad apples that give everybody. You know, one of the things I kind of touched on a little bit was the idea that I'm a licensed plumber. This job requires people to come in and do the work that go beyond that. I need somebody who's an electrician or whatever. How does one protect themselves against subcontractors? Because if the contract, as I understand it, if the contractor doesn't pay the subcontractor, the subcontractor can come back, even though I don't have a contract with them, and sue me or put a lien on my house.
Yeah.
How do I protect myself against that?
You can do everything right, and that can still happen. The main thing that you want to do is before you're making your final payments to your contractor, let's say the general contractor, you ask for releases, release of liens or a statement. It's basically called a release of a lien or a release of a statement of subs being paid, suppliers being paid.
Now that's from him, not from
him.
the subs?
Right, because you may not know who the subs are. You
Yeah,
have
that's
no
what I was going
idea.
to say. These people all came in and worked on the project, but I don't know who they are.
You have no idea who they are. So what you're looking for from the contractor is that release, authenticating that subs and suppliers have been paid before you get your final draw. Banks will require that if there's a construction loan. And you can do all that, and he can lie on that document, and the subcontractor may still file a lien on your property. What I try to tell people is you can do everything right, and it can still end up bad. Now, that doesn't mean that the subcontractor is going to take action on that lien. It's just a notice. It's just a lien.
It sits there.
It just sits there. It'll expire in 12 months if no action is taken.
Oh,
It just
really?
goes away. Absolutely.
okay.
So that's a complicated area. We help consumers with that. We'll try to walk them through the lien laws and things like
It'd be
that.
good if they talked to you first before they signed a contract. Is that right?
Well, it would help. We can give them information up front to help them deal with that process as it's going forward. But I've had some very good educated consumers still run into a problem because that's just the way that it is.
Kevin, it's a really good thing that you didn't bring more brochures because we didn't get through all the ones that you have, and we only broad brushed or touched on each of these. But I want our audience to understand this is a very complicated process. Consumer frauds are out there. They're out there all the time. And every time you have a dealing with someone, you have a potential for liability. Is that correct? And so better than blindly going into this, a lot of older people don't have anybody to talk to. They need to come to you, Kevin Jackson, right?
Come to our office. We can mail information to them. Visit our website. Our website is covered with these types of things that will help educate them.
Kevin, we'll have you back. I'm Bill Hodges. You're unique, you're special, you're great. Tell yourself so often because you are, you know. We'll see you on the next Spotlight on Government. Again, Kevin, thanks for being here. Great information. Everybody ought to be paying attention.
Thanks for having me, Bill.